The elevator smelled like burnt coffee and someone's microwave lunch, same as it had every single morning for the past 11 years. I pressed the button for the 14th floor and watched the doors close. My reflection in the polished metal looked older than I remembered. 52. Grey at the temples. Hands that had spent over a decade building something real inside that building. I used to be proud of that reflection. The company was a mid-sized commercial insurance firm based out of Columbus, Ohio. Not glamorous, not tech, not the kind of place people write about in Forbes, but it was solid. We managed risk portfolios for regional manufacturers, construction outfits, medical groups, the kind of clients who don't care about flash. They care about trust. They care about knowing that when something goes wrong, the person on the other end of the phone has actually read their file. I was that person. For 11 years, I was that person. My title was Senior Account Director. I'd come up from the bottom, started as an underwriting assistant right out of a second chance community college degree program I'd scraped through in my late 30s. Before that, I'd spent 12 years driving trucks across the Midwest. Long hauls, lonely nights, fast food at 3 in the morning outside of Des Moines. When my back started going and my marriage was already fraying at every seam, I made a decision. I went back to school. I reinvented. By the time I got hired at Meridian Risk Group, I wasn't a kid looking for a foothold. I was 41 years old with something to prove and no time to waste. I proved it. Within 3 years, I'd taken over the manufacturing vertical, a book of business worth about $40 million annually. I knew every client by name, not just the contact name in the system, but their kids' names, their expansion plans, their biggest fears about the coming quarter. I drove to their facilities. I walked their floors. I ate bad sandwiches in their conference rooms and stayed on the phone with them during hurricane season when a roof collapsed at one of their satellite plants. That's the thing about this business. It's not about spreadsheets. It's about showing up. My manager was a woman named Beverly. She'd been with the company for about 9 years when I joined, and for a long time we had a genuinely good working relationship. She wasn't warm exactly. Beverly ran cold, strategic, always 3 steps ahead, but she was fair. She recognized performance. She gave credit when it was due. That started to change around year 8. I noticed it in small ways at first. My name missing from a client presentation I'd built. A renewal meeting I should have been in, suddenly handed off to a junior rep without explanation. A quarterly review where Beverly sat across from me and used words like visibility and executive presence in a way that felt less like feedback and more like a warning I wasn't supposed to understand yet. I didn't push back. I told myself it was politics, that it would pass, that my numbers would speak for themselves. They always had before. Then Beverly's nephew joined the company. His name was Tanner. He was 26, maybe 27. Business degree from a state school in Arizona. 1 year of experience at a small regional brokerage that I'm pretty sure he got through a family connection. He was friendly enough, good handshake, easy smile. The kind of guy who knows how to work a room without knowing much about the room he's in. Beverly introduced him to the team as a high-potential new addition. She said it with the kind of deliberate smile people use when they're daring you to say something. Nobody said anything. I told myself I'd give him a fair shot. I've worked with young people before. Some of them are genuinely impressive. Age doesn't tell you everything. But over the next few months, I watched things happen that I couldn't explain away. Tanner was assigned to shadow me on 3 major accounts. Fine. I understood that part. You learn by being in the room. What I didn't understand was when Beverly started copying him on client emails without telling me, or when I came back from a 2-day industry conference to find that Tanner had taken a call from my largest client, a manufacturing group out of Dayton, and had apparently represented himself as the lead contact going forward. I went to Beverly's office that afternoon. I knocked on the open door and asked if we could talk. She gestured to the chair across from her desk without looking up from her laptop. I laid it out clearly. I wasn't aggressive. I wasn't emotional. I simply described what had happened and asked for clarification on Tanner's role and whether there had been a change in account ownership I hadn't been informed of. Beverly closed her laptop. She looked at me for a long moment with an expression I can only describe as patient, like she was waiting for me to finish a sentence she'd already heard. "We're trying to create depth on the team," she said. "That means cross-training on key accounts. It's not personal, Nathan." "Nathan, that's me. Nathan Briggs." I said I understood cross-training. I said I'd been doing it for years. I said that what concerned me wasn't Tanner learning the accounts. It was being removed from client conversations without being told. She nodded slowly. "I'll look into it." That was it. I walked back to my desk and sat down and stared at my monitor for a few minutes without really seeing it. My phone buzzed. A text from my daughter, Kira. "Dad, you coming to Emma's recital Thursday?" Emma is my granddaughter, 7 years old. She plays violin about as well as you'd expect a 7-year-old to play violin, which is to say it sounds like a very small cat having a complicated day. "I love every second of it. Wouldn't miss it," I wrote back. I set the phone face down on my desk and tried to refocus. 3 weeks later, they announced the promotions. It was a Thursday afternoon. Beverly sent a company-wide email, the kind with a banner graphic at the top and everyone's name in bold. 2 promotions, one in the personal lines division and one in commercial accounts. Tanner's name was in that second slot. His new title, Senior Commercial Account Manager. My title. Or rather, a version of my title with different words that meant the same thing. He would now be overseeing the manufacturing vertical. The one I'd built. The one I'd managed for 8 years. I read the email twice. Then I read it a third time, slowly, the way you reread something when you're waiting for it to mean something different. It didn't. I looked up from my screen. Across the open floor plan, I could see Tanner accepting congratulations. Someone had already brought a cupcake from somewhere. Beverly was standing near his desk, smiling the way she smiled in client meetings. Practiced, precise, a smile that was really a statement. I looked back at my screen. I didn't send a reply to the email. I didn't walk over. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, very still, and let the noise of the office wash over me, the phones ringing, the printer down the hall, the hum of the HVAC system in the ceiling, and I started doing math. Not the kind of math you do at work. The other kind. The personal kind. The kind you do when you're sitting quietly in a moment that changes things. I had a house with 13 months left on the mortgage. I had a pension that had vested 4 years ago. I had a brokerage account I'd been adding to every month since my 50s started. Nothing spectacular but steady. I had a truck that was paid off. I had no credit card debt because I'd made it my mission to have no credit card debt after what the divorce cost me back in the day. I was not rich, but I was not fragile. That distinction mattered more than I'd realized until that exact moment. I went home that evening and I sat in my kitchen and I made a list on a yellow legal pad. Not a pros and cons list, not an emotional processing list, just numbers. What I had, what I owed. What I needed per month to live comfortably, what I could reasonably generate if I went independent. Consulting, fractional work, the kind of arrangement I knew several former colleagues had built successfully after leaving corporate roles. My son called while I was in the middle of it. His name is Derek, 30 years old, works in IT out in Denver. "Hey Pop, how's work?" "It's work," I said. He could hear something in my voice, the way kids can even when they're not kids anymore. He asked what happened. I gave him the short version. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, "Dad, you've been carrying that place for a decade. You know that, right?" "I know," I said. "So what are you going to do?" I looked down at my legal pad. The numbers were clear. The math was solid. "I'm going to sleep on it," I said. "And then I'm going to do what makes sense." I slept 6 hours, which for me is a full night. I woke up at 5:15, made coffee, and sat in the same chair at the kitchen table and looked at the same legal pad. I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me. I'd expected to wake up still burning. Instead, I felt something quieter and, in its way, more certain. Like a door had been locked from the outside, and instead of rattling the handle, I'd simply turned around and noticed there was another door behind me that had been there the whole time. I called my financial advisor when the markets opened, asked a few specific questions about timing and tax implications of a resignation versus a layoff. She was straightforward with me, which is why I'd kept her for 12 years. The answers were what I needed to hear. Then I drove to the office. I didn't bring anything special, just my usual bag. I walked in through the lobby, nodded to the security desk, took the elevator to 14. The office smelled the same as it always did. Burnt coffee. Someone's lunch. I went to Beverly's office at 9:15. I knocked on the open door. She looked up. "Nathan, do you have a minute scheduled?" "I don't see. I don't have a meeting," I said. "I just need 5 minutes." She gestured to the chair. I sat down. I placed my resignation letter on her desk. 1 page. Clear language. 30 days notice as required by my contract, though I'd made my peace with the possibility that they'd walk me out the same day. A lot of companies do. Beverly looked at the letter without picking it up. She read it where it sat. I watched her face move through something, surprise, calculation, and then something I can only describe as the beginning of concern. "Nathan," she said, "let's talk about this before you make a decision." "It's already a decision," I said. "This is me informing you of it. You've been here 11 years. You built real equity here. Whatever happened with the promotion, we can talk about that. There are other paths." I let her finish. I didn't interrupt. When she was done, I said, "I appreciate you saying that. I genuinely do. But I've thought it through, and this is where I've landed." I stood up. Beverly's expression shifted then. The practiced calm she always wore in professional situations developed a small crack. Not dramatic. She wasn't the type. But it was there. "You're one of 3 people who actually knows the Dayton account inside out," she said. "If you leave, that transition is going to be very difficult." "I know," I said. "Tanner will figure it out." I said it without sarcasm. I meant it to be plain. Then I walked out. The next several weeks were quieter than I expected. I finished my notice period. I documented everything. Account notes, contact histories, outstanding renewals, open claims. I did it thoroughly because that's who I am, not because I owed them more than I'd already given. On my last day, a few people stopped by my desk. Some of them had been there long enough to understand what they were watching happen. A couple of them hugged me. One woman who had worked in claims for 8 years said quietly, "You were the best one they had. Everyone knows it." I thanked her. I meant that too. I drove home in my paid-off truck on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The light was doing that thing it does in the Midwest in fall, going gold and sideways through the trees. I had nowhere to be. I had nowhere to be. I had no emails to answer. It was a strange feeling. Not bad. Just wide open. The call started 3 weeks after I left. First, it was one of the junior reps I'd mentored, reaching out personally, asking if I did any consulting work. I said I was in the process of setting up that structure and to stay tuned. Then it was a client, not through the company's channels, directly to my personal cell, which several of the long-term clients had because that's how trust works after a decade. The operations manager at a fabrication company out of Mansfield. He said they'd been struggling to get clear answers from Meridian since I'd left. He said Tanner seemed like a good kid, but that there were some gaps in understanding on a complex renewal coming up. He asked if I'd be willing to do some outside advisory work. I said I'd have to be careful about any conflict of interest questions, but that I'd look into it. Then another client called. Same story, slightly different details. By early November, I had 3 former Meridian clients who had quietly begun asking about alternative representation or supplemental consulting. I brought in an attorney I'd used during my divorce, sharp, methodical, not cheap, and we structured everything properly. No poaching, no violations, nothing that would give Meridian grounds for a lawsuit. Clean, legal, professional. I filed my LLC on a Friday morning, Nathan Briggs Commercial Risk Advisory, LLC. I spent exactly $11 on a logo from an online design service, which was honestly about right. I didn't need fancy. I needed functional. In December, I heard through someone who still worked there that Beverly had flown to Dayton twice in 6 weeks trying to stabilize the manufacturing accounts. That Tanner had made some commitments during a renewal call that he hadn't fully understood the implications of, and that the client had escalated. I heard it and I sat with it for a moment. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. It wasn't about that. I'd spent 11 years building something real, and I'd been passed over for reasons that had nothing to do with performance. And now the consequences of that choice were playing out the way consequences tend to do when they're rooted in something real. That's all it was. Cause and effect. By the following spring, I had 4 consulting clients, a working rhythm that let me be home by 3 every afternoon, and a better relationship with the work itself than I'd had in years. I drove to Kira's house on a Saturday in April and watched Emma's spring recital. The violin still technically optional torture, but said with love, and I sat in a folding chair in a school gymnasium in Columbus, Ohio. And I felt something I hadn't felt inside that elevator on the 14th floor in a very long time. I felt like myself. My son called that evening. "How's the business going, Pop?" "Good," I said. "Slow and good. You miss it, the big company thing." I thought about the elevator. The burnt coffee, the Thursday afternoon email with the banner graphic, Beverly's face when I put that letter on her desk. "No," I said. "I really don't." We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. His apartment, a hiking trip he was planning, whether the Bengals had any hope this season, the ordinary stuff that fills in the edges of a life. After I hung up, I sat on my back porch for a while. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere down the street, kids were riding bikes. A dog was barking at something only it could see. I thought about the list I'd made on that yellow legal pad, the numbers that had told me clearly that I was not trapped, that the door I thought was the only door was not the only door. I thought about all the years I'd spent being the reliable one, the one who showed up early and stayed late and never made noise about it because I believed the work would speak. And it did speak. It just wasn't speaking to anyone who was willing to listen at that particular company, in that particular building, under that particular management. That wasn't my failure. It took me a while to get there, but I got there. I went inside, poured a glass of water, and stood at my kitchen window for a moment. The light was going. The day was almost done. I had an early morning call with a new client prospect, a medical equipment distributor out of Cincinnati who'd gotten my name from a referral. I had notes to review, questions to prepare, a rate model to finalize, work I'd built myself, for myself. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed at a reasonable hour, which is something I hadn't done consistently in 11 years. That night, I slept like a man who had made the right choice. I still have that yellow legal pad somewhere in my desk drawer. I don't look at it often, but when I do, I'm not reminded of the night I made a decision. I'm reminded of the night I finally stopped pretending the decision hadn't already been made for me. That's the thing nobody tells you about, moments like the one I had sitting in Beverly's office, sliding that letter across her desk. People assume it took courage, and maybe it did, in a technical sense. But what it actually took was clarity. The courage had been building for years. Every morning I walked into that elevator. Every quarter I delivered results that got acknowledged with a nod and forgotten by the next meeting. Every time I watched the work I'd done get folded quietly into someone else's story. By the time Tanner's name appeared in that promotion email, I wasn't shocked. I was finished. There's a version of this where I stayed, where I took Beverly's offer to talk about other paths and sat back down in that chair and negotiated something smaller in exchange for my dignity. I've thought about that version. A lot of people I know are living it right now, and I don't judge them for it. Everyone's math is different. Everyone's situation is different. But for me, in that room, on that morning, I knew with complete certainty that staying would cost more than leaving. Not financially, something harder to measure. What I learned, what I'm still learning, honestly, is that integrity isn't a one-time choice. It's a daily practice, and it either compounds over time or it doesn't. I'd spent 11 years doing the right thing when no one was watching, staying late on renewals that weren't mine, walking clients through crises that weren't in my job description, building relationships that were real because I treated them as real. That wasn't strategy. That was just who I decided to be when I walked into that building every morning. And when the environment stopped honoring that, when it actively penalized it, the work I'd done didn't disappear. It moved with me. The clients who called my personal cell weren't calling because they felt sorry for me. They were calling because over a decade I had demonstrated something that's genuinely rare in any industry, that I meant what I said and I delivered what I promised. You can't fake that over 11 years. You can fake it for 11 months maybe, but not 11 years. The record speaks eventually, to someone, somewhere. I think about Derek's questions sometimes. So what are you going to do? He asked it the way a son asks when he's worried, but trying not to sound worried. And the honest answer, the one I didn't quite have words for that night on the phone, is that I was going to trust what I'd built inside myself more than I trusted what someone else had decided about my worth. That's not bravado. That's not some tidy lesson with a bow on it. Some mornings I woke up in the first few months and wondered if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. The uncertainty was real, the quiet was sometimes too quiet. But I kept showing up. For the work, for the clients, for my daughter's kids on a Saturday in a gymnasium with folding chairs and a 7-year-old doing her best with a violin. I kept building. Carefully, honestly, without cutting corners, because that's the only way I know how to build anything that actually holds. The math on the legal pad was right, but the math was never really the point.